In terms of the election, obviously Marty losing is really unfortunate. That district is in 3 counties, and there's about 300 votes that separated Marty and her opponent. So it's too bad. I was really glad to be reelected by my neighbors. See a lot of faces that helped with that, and I really want to thank you for all that you did. There's just so much that goes into this process. I mean, I see people that had yard signs out, people that helped on a day-to-day. So I just thank you. And I guess what I want to hope to lead into now is a discussion that those efforts are going to hopefully bear fruit in this upcoming legislative session. So I guess I want to start kind of with the fiscal end of things, where our state is right now. We've talked a lot, times to come in here, on the $1.1 billion deficit. It does look like over the last 6 months or so that the economy really has improved in the state of Wyoming. Our revenue outlook has improved a lot. And that $1.1 billion deficit, hard to say for sure where it's going to be at. We're going to get a memo from the staff at the Legislative Service Office next week. But I'm thinking it's looking like this could be cut in half. Don't want to say for sure, but I think that's where we're looking now. The projections that were released 2 weeks ago by the Legislative Service Office, right after those projections were released, we've seen this $10 decline in the price of oil. So obviously that's very volatile, and it depends on the projections panning out. But thinking about the 3 main accounts in the state of Wyoming and the deficits in each, you have the general fund, which funds the general operations of government, and that one, there's actually been testimony received by some of the economists at the state, at the appropriations committee, looks like that's going to be balanced, that there's going to be very little deficit there. The second main account is the school funding account, which is the program account. That's the check that the state writes to school districts across the state. That deficit is still going to be there, but is it going to be the $500 million that we were looking at? It appears no. And then the third one is the school capital construction account, which funds state school capital construction, and then also major maintenance on those buildings. And that one was mainly funded historically by what's called co-lease bonus. That has gone down to zero because of the lack of mining on federal land. So that one has been in the past funded with the stopgap check out of the rainy day account, our main cash savings account. And that hasn't changed. That is still, the co-lease bonus is slated to be at zero. But the good news is that the revenue projections are improving in a big way. Now, that leads into the overall question here. I mean, what are we going to do as a state? Are we going to take this improved outlook and waste the funds? Hopefully the answer to that is no, because we've seen in the past how these mineral revenues, which we're blessed with as a state, have been wasted. And then we come back here to what we've seen over the last 4 years or so. We aren't as flush, and then suddenly the narrative is about increasing taxes, which is the wrong way to go. So that leads a little bit into the discussion of this upcoming session, which are we going to continue these one-time expenditures, which are very expensive for the state, and that's not included in those deficit numbers, where in the past 2 years, even with a $1.1 billion hole, we've been taking on new one-time expenditures that have come out of our main cash savings account, the rainy day fund. So, I mean, just to give an example of a couple of these, in the last session, the example I've been given is this single-payer airline, where in 3 communities, they are going to, actually the state is going to be, in the airline business, going to be providing the service in a third-party contract, and then the state is going to be buying and selling the tickets. So all the risk is on the state, not with Delta or United or their subsidiaries or whatever. And obviously this is sort of a new path for the state, in my view, a new path towards the negative. Now, one thing I found very interesting, and I'm on the Minerals Economic Development Committee, where this bill originally we were able to stop this, but we worked very hard at that, and then it came back in the session as an individual bill. But we received some of the testimony from WYDOT and the Aeronautics Commission there. And remember, originally the Star Tribune reported that, the state of Wyoming has been paying $1.3 million a year for what was a cash subsidy for airports around the state. And this was just going to replace that program. And it was going to cost about $1.3 million a year, maybe $1.5 million to do this. And that the cash subsidy that the state was doing was going to be replaced by this, and that this was going to be more efficient. And that was pitched over and over and over again in this Star Tribune. And it turns out that now after it's passed, that's not the plan. The plan is to have this what they call capacity purchase agreement, or single payer air for those three communities, and then on top of that to continue the cash subsidy, the $1.3 million a year. So that's the proposal that is coming before the legislature now once this has been set in motion. Now, there is still an opportunity for us to relook at this. The one thing that in the back and forth on this single payer air bill that we were able to get in the final budget was that this had to be approved by the legislature one last time. So when WYDOT comes forward to the legislature in January and February with the proposed contract, the funds still need to be dispersed, or as often is called authorized, I guess would be the technical term for it. So there is one last opportunity for us to look at this, and I think that kind of keys into this, this bifurcated path that we have of the road less traveled, of fiscal responsibility, less government, making sure that we shepherd our resources in a responsible way, or the second path, which is more government, waste, which inevitably leads to the tax increase narrative. Another of these one-time expenditures that I think we really need to be looking at in plugging this hole which still exists are state capital construction. This is a bill which always flows through the legislature for new state buildings, and it's very expensive. And as I go around the district to my neighbors, it's one of the first things that people talk about. So you look at some of the examples of what's flowed through the state capital construction bill. Over $80 million for a new building at UW. That's 4 times some of the education changes that have been looked at. So, I mean, you talk about real money. It often is in these state capital construction bills, which are not necessary expenditures. Another thing that now they're going to key into, and they set up in the last bill, was these new dormitories at UW. Is it really the state government's role to fund this when we're already funding the block grant that is a huge part of the university's operating budget? Not to mention that, Laramie, I was just talking with someone about this the other day, has a very vibrant, there's people on fixed income that rent out a room to a student. And suddenly the government is going to potentially be in competition with that use of private capital, very efficient use of private capital. And is that the proper role of government? And I look at the university I attend, whenever they build new dormitories, and now I just saw this flow through my email the other day, that they always had a requirement, right, that the freshmen had to live in the dorms, right, because that's a way to make sure that the demand is there. Well, they just expanded this at the university I attended, University of Pennsylvania. Because they built a bunch of new dormitories, and now the requirement is that freshmen and sophomores, I think that's what it is, that they have to, don't quote me, I might have read that wrong, but they changed the requirement of who needed to be in the dormitories, and anyway, I worry about that as well. I mean, obviously there should be freedom to choose in where you live, and that's not there when you have a requirement like that. So that's going to be a big debate, is whether the state should fund this. Another big debate that I think on the state capital construction bill is whether to build a new governor's mansion. And we talk about how in the state capital construction bill in 2018, they sort of set in motion the next items they want the state to pay for. And one of the things they did in the last bill was they authorized the executive branch to sell the governor's mansion this year and then put the new governor up in a rental. Well, I mean, you can already see where this is going. And the argument in the upcoming session is going to be, well, the new governor's in a rental, and this is so expensive, and there's no options. Well, why are there no options? Because the crisis was created with this last state capital construction bill. So that's going to be a big item as well.
Chuck,
Yeah.
is the governor's mansion on the National Register?
Historical register?
I don't believe so, because the current governor's mansion, right, is off the interstate and on that golf course, and is relatively recent. Then you have the other historical mansion, which is right in downtown, which is no longer in use. And that's one of the discussions. I mean, why don't we bring that back to use? But I believe the answer is no. And it is apparently Cheyenne Frontier Days that wants to purchase that. So anyway. In this environment where we've got an improved revenue picture, there are still going to be the troubling tax increase efforts. And I think they're going to be a little bit different than what we've seen in the past, although we might still also see the typical attempts. One of the things they're going to try out of the Revenue Committee, and I really think that there's a chance this is going to advance out of the committee, is this effort to create another % optional tax at the local level. So right now in state statute, you've got the first 4%. That's the state. Then you've got the 5th %, which is an optional % to be approved by the voters, which is for general uses. And that was, of course, approved in Natrona last week again. And then you've got the option for a 6th %, which in Natrona County, of course, has been tried numerous times. I mean, I think what are we at? 3 times on the Townsend building, and then 2 on the library. Anyway, it's always failed since the year 2000, at least in Natrona County, in my memory. And a lot of counties have that. I believe it's all but 2 counties have the 5th %, and then a lot of counties have the 6th %. Although in Natrona, we've been able to stop that. Well, now what they want to do is they want to have a 7th %, and they want to have increments of 1/4% for anything. And so it would be option to approve a 1/4% increase in increments for anything. And that's what they're trying to bring out of the Revenue Committee. And listening to the gubernatorial debate, I mean, obviously Trinity was at all those debates, but I think a lot of the gubernatorial candidates seemed positive to this sort of approach. I don't think it's the right way to go, but if it did get out of the legislature, I am concerned that it could get traction. And so, just reading some of the debates, I know that the cities or WHAM, which is the lobbying group, was really pushing this. And I know at a lot of the debates, a lot of the candidates seem very open to this. And I don't remember, I wasn't there in terms of what Mark Gordon said on this, but if this came out of the legislature, I think that there's a lot of groups pushing this. So that's something we really need to watch. I do think there's going to be a property tax increase attempt looked at in the last Revenue Committee meeting. Hopefully that is stopped. That bill has not been posted to the website yet, and so we need to watch that as well. The other thing they're looking at in the Revenue Committee is a corporate income tax, and we hear that buzzword a lot coming out of the media and some of the more left-wing candidates, and they are looking at that for a possible vote, so that's another thing we need to watch. And of course, you know, they love the corporate income tax, right, because of the first word. Well, of course, that's going to flow to the consumer, right, and that's something that I think it's very important we point out. I think another thing they're going to attempt is what is called Tax Reform 2020. They've brought this bill in the last 2 sessions, and what it would be is the creation of this committee. They love committees and task forces because usually what comes out of those are reports that then the media uses to build momentum around big government ideas, and the idea there is that there's going to be this committee which is going to churn out a report which will probably advocate for tax increases. And we've been able to stop this the last few sessions, which was actually a pretty big win. And I think they're going to, bring that attempt again. Another thing I want to talk about is real economic development, and Trinity talked about how that word has been co-opted. And we need to really, as conservatives, we need to take back that word because we want our economy to grow. We just don't want to use these tactics of more spending, grants being given to politically connected groups, picking winners and losers, which, if anything, I mean, this is an approach that has been done for the last 30 years, I would argue has hurt our economy because of the disincentives it creates, and also the state resources that it spends, which gets us closer and closer to a possible, to them creating a crisis where we don't have the money, and then they try to push higher taxes, which of course is not good for our economy. And the other thing I think we really need to push back on is they say, they go, well, if it was just about taxes, why doesn't Wyoming have more economic development? Because we have a low tax structure. Well, it's not just about taxes. It's about creating economies of scale. But you don't do that by giving grants to politically connected businesses. You do that by growing the economy and by having an environment that there's a lot of business creation. And obviously, when you look at why that's not happening in Wyoming, the first thing you have to look at is that on access to capital, we're number 50. So anyway, in terms of real economic development, some of the approaches that I think we can take in this session is one, these blockchain bills which were passed in the last legislative session, which clarify our regulatory structure in Wyoming towards this new technology, which other states have. Oftentimes, it's been a political dispute in Delaware why the Secretary of State hasn't done that. Other states haven't done that. So this new technology is looking for a state where they can get clarity in terms of the regulatory structure. And we're trying to do that in the state of Wyoming so that some of these businesses will plop down here. And that'll, of course, create economies of scale where there should be other businesses that are going to grow around that, in addition to the services that grow that are created whenever you have new jobs in a certain area. There's a certain amount that are linked to that. So we're going to continue working on that. I know the Corporations Committee, I heard they were looking at 9 or 10 bills on that, and I think they truncated that a little bit, but I know Bob came down to Cheyenne for a couple events on that, and on that new technology. So we're working on that. Another thing that hopefully we can work on is getting this coal export terminal sited in the state of Washington. And we talk about coal lease bonus monies. I mean, one coal export terminal bring back a huge amount of the coal capacity that we've lost in the last 5 or 6 years. And so bottom line here is these states on the exterior of our country on the West Coast are blocking this, and it's a clear interstate commerce violation. That's why the Interstate Commerce Clause was written, not for all of these arguments that the left has brought to grow government over time. The Interstate Commerce Clause has been totally used to grow government in inappropriate ways, while the actual use of it has not really been litigated, which is the fact that exterior states are blocking interior states from being able to export their goods. And the founders saw that as a real problem, and that's why it was written. And so we need to sue the state of Washington and get that done. That's a little bit on economic development and approach for real economic development. A couple things about the path forward, and then I'll wrap up here. I think we need to get this fiscal transparency done. We're one of 3 states where the state checkbook isn't available, and I think one of the things about that gubernatorial race, we've been trying forever to get the media to report about the fact that the legislature appropriates these funds, and then we don't know how they're being spent, if they're being spent appropriately. It's like writing you write on a check not to exceed a certain amount oftentimes. It's like writing a check not to exceed $30 million and handing it to a state agency. Yes, there are line items in there, there are some controls, but not having the state checkbook available is a huge problem. And so we're going to try to get that done. I think that one of the things that some of those ad buys from the gubernatorial campaign created was some momentum around this. And I was at the buffet the other day up at the mall, and someone came up to me and said, Chuck, are we going to get this fiscal transparency done? I was like, this is awesome. That's what we've been trying to do. We've been trying to get the media report on this. And some of the ad campaigns from that gubernatorial race, I think, did really raise awareness on that issue. And I think this is actually going to get done. I don't know if the bill's going to be perfect, and we're going to work really hard on this. I actually think this one's going to get done. And so that's going to be a big item for our state. In terms of moving forward, I also think we need to look at continued controls in the general fund. You talked about the past $500 million in potential reduction. There's a lot of fat in that general fund, and we've got to continue to work on that. Another thing we're going to bring and be working with my colleague, Senator-elect Beitman, currently Representative Bo Beitman, is a taxpayer's Bill of Rights, which is really important when we see the possibility for this Powder River play. All the mineral revenue that's going to come in from that, it's going to be really, from what I've heard, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now. And you hear different things in terms of the time frame, but we're already seeing the recovery. But I've heard 2 years from now, if we don't mess it up, we've got the opportunity for a real bonanza in our state. And we can't waste another one of these. And so the idea here would be to have a cap in the growth in the general fund and inflation plus population growth, because the last time we had a boom, we were seeing 40 to 50% year-to-year growth in the general fund, which funds general government operation. And that wasted, rather than saving those funds for when we're not as flush, that wasted that. And then we have the last 4 years where we have this painful discussion on where they want to increase taxes or cut schools in ways that we don't want to do in terms of that would hurt the programs that we have. And that's the other thing, is we need to make sure that those dollars are used efficiently in the classroom, not wasted. And that's another thing we're going to be working on in the school models. We need transparency in that school model, because there's a lot that's not going into the classroom and that isn't being spent appropriately. So we got to make sure we don't waste another one of these, and we're gonna push that taxpayers' Bill of Rights. Couple other bills that I think are going to be in this next session, I think are going to be important. The prohibition on sanctuary cities. I think we need to get out ahead of this. Laramie and Jackson are looking at this. We need to ban it in state statute and say no state funds are going to go to these cities. That'll nip it in the bud, especially that state funds part, because these cities are addicted to the state funds. I think we need to have a Medicaid work requirement. This is something that the Trump administration, unlike Obama, is allowing at the federal level. This is basic. I mean, states like New Hampshire, I was reading it passed almost unanimously in the New Hampshire State House. And we couldn't get this done in the last session in Wyoming, where we got a supermajority, Republican supermajority. This is basic. You know, this is about having a 20-hour-a-week requirement to be looking for work or volunteering or working. I go around my district to my neighbors, and that's reasonable. And so we can get that done. Recall of elected municipal officials, that's another bill. I'm not sure Bunky's going to bring that back, but I think that was a really great bill. Another thing which came out of the Ag Committee yesterday that I was so excited about, we had a state meeting. I'm on the Ag Committee. We had a state meeting the day after the election. And I am really excited about this because I'm very concerned about some of these land swaps, hurting public access. We saw the Bonander land swap proposal, which was able to be stopped. But I think, and I've talked about this in my district we've been talking about it for years, is that all land swaps need to be approved by the legislature. And we had a bill come through Ag yesterday, which would have required all land swaps with the federal government to be approved by the legislature. And we actually amended it so that it would be all land swaps, which is a big deal. And we actually got it through committee. I was shocked. This is a big deal, big reform for our state. I think it's going to increase confidence in this process, a process which I think has been abused, and I see a real lack of confidence in it. And we need to make sure that this process, if it's done, is used right. And I think having the legislature approve these is the way to go.